Good morning.
Even sound isn't working.
Good morning.
All right, let's see if we can get the sound working. Okay.
So I can hear you.
Connected to the TV?
Yep, it's connected to the TV. That way everybody can see. That's why the sound. Okay, can you hear us now?
Oh, yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Perfect. Thank you.
Great. Good morning.
Good morning. We're going to gather here. They're just
Okay.
coming in. We were practicing duets.
Ah,
So there's our TV. And then I'm taking this spot. I'll have the remote. Oh, you're fine. I guess I can put away some of the chairs. You can wherever you like. We got plenty of room.
Yeah.
Oh, where are you sitting, Sarah? I'm gonna sit there by the table.
That's another one I'm working on.
Yeah.
You can
Apparently.
No.
Unless we're going to do rice, if we need the rice, then I need to bring that table. I brought something rice with right on.
Do you want to come over by the table? I can move the TV. It burns. It's on a swivel.
It all depends on who we go.
Would you like us to write things down? Do we need to be writing on manuscript paper or?
I think, if I don't have that directly planned, like I have handouts that I'll send afterwards that you can print out, but as I'm going along with some of the examples, it could be good to practice as I'm explaining them. So it's up to you there how you want to. If you just want to listen, I think that works. If you want to practice as I'm saying things, that can also work too.
Alright, so up to you. I'll just sit here. Okay. And then I have a remote so I can make it louder and softer and we should be good.
All right, so are we waiting for other people to join on Zoom, or are most people going to be in the room with you?
Oh, Nick Fillers.
Most of the ones who responded back are going to be in the room with me. I did send an email out to a couple of students who might join us by Zoom.
Yeah, one of mine was on Nick Fillers.
I don't happen to see them, but that's okay. We don't need to wait for them. They might have chosen not to.
I do.
Yeah, you're the only one in person.
Oh, yeah, I'll be on the student.
Well, yeah.
Yep.
All right, then. So I'm recording the meeting too, so it can be sent out to other people later on in case anybody wants to. Yeah.
We couldn't do it today, but we might.
And are you waiting on anybody to arrive in the room, or is everybody there?
We're here.
Everybody's here. We're good.
Okay. All right, so then I guess I'll get started. And so it's great to see all of you, and it's too bad I can't be out there in person. Hopefully that'll come back sometime soon, but I'm really grateful that we have this modern technology that lets us still meet remotely anyway. And so just to tell you briefly about myself, my name is Stephen Lewis, and I'm a pianist and composer and private music teacher. I live in Portland, and I've lived here in Portland for about 4.5 years now. And I perform as a concert pianist. I do recitals. I've performed with the Oregon Symphony and with other groups around the state. And I have a PhD in composition and a DMA in piano and from UC San Diego. And for my undergrad, I went to Oberlin, where I majored in piano and composition. I'm originally from Massachusetts, and but I'm very excited that I'm making Oregon my home, and it's been great getting to know everybody in the OMTA. And yeah, so today's talk will be about literally the some basic nuts and bolts of doing of writing music down on paper or in a computer program, so that music like when you compose something or you arrange something, that it looks professional and looks clear. And so that's what today's talk is going to be about. So I'm going to share the screen. I'm going to start with a short PowerPoint presentation, and then move on to show a number of concrete examples of some basic notation rules. And everything I'm showing you, I can also send to you as handouts that you can print out and have for your reference later on. So if some of the things, yeah, I'm going to cover a lot of different details, and then you'll be able to have handouts so you can refer back to them later on too. All right, so let me share the screen. And I'm going to start my slideshow. All right, so nuts and bolts of writing music down. So I just want to talk about some basic principles of notating music. And the most concise way that I can sum it up is just with two words: be clear. That's the most important thing about writing music down, but I'll elaborate on that, of course. So, to start with, we want to think about what exactly a musical score is. And with the term score, I'm also including parts. Like if you compose a piece for an orchestra or a band, and you make individual parts for the different instruments, I'm basically including that under the umbrella of a score. And scores are instructions. Sometimes in music, we have a tendency to use the same word, music, to refer both to the sounds and the performance of music, like when we were playing a Chopin ballade or a Beethoven sonata. And we also use the same word, music, to refer to the score. So, we can say like, oh, make sure you bring your music. We know we mean make sure you bring your score. And mostly we understand the difference, but sometimes I think because we use the same word colloquially to mean both things, we sometimes start to feel like the score is the music somehow. But really the score is just a set of instructions. And I like to compare it to things like recipes for bread or for meals, or blueprints, like for designing and building a house. The score, its goal is to communicate to the musician what to do in order to recreate the music. And I wanted to talk a little bit about this, to expand on this. And music is something that's found in every human culture around the world, and as far as archaeologists can tell, it's been found in every human culture at all points in human history. It seems like music is something that's common to humanity at every stage, every location. And for most of human history, and still commonly in many parts of the world, music is entirely an oral tradition. So an oral tradition is a tradition where there are no written instructions. Instead, music is passed down from teachers to students entirely through demonstration and through rote learning, through listening and observing. And in many cultures, you have specialized sort of guilds where you have like a master musician who takes on apprentices, and the apprentices learn how to do things. And this is actually also how our tradition was a long time ago too. If you go back to about the year 700, 800, that's until then, even European music was also an oral tradition, completely an oral tradition. And around that time, that's when Gregorian chant was developed, and that's around the time that our music notation tradition started. And since then, our Western European-based musical tradition has gradually increased the amount that we rely upon scores on a written tradition. But really importantly, and I'm sure all of you will understand this when I explain it, even our Western classical music tradition is still very much an oral tradition in addition to a written tradition. And the one of the best examples about why that's the case is we exist. Our jobs exist as music teachers. If a musical score was really completely adequate for communicating how to play Beethoven or Brahms or Debussy, then teachers wouldn't really be necessary. There's still so much that is transmitted through an oral tradition, even in classical music, that teachers are still essential. And you probably know this the most clearly from how much you write on your students' scores all the time, and how when you're teaching students to play musically on the piano, you have to tell them things like, when the phrase goes up, you have to play louder, and when the phrase comes down, you play softer, generally speaking, in order to make it sound musical. Or things like how you voice the top of a chord, oftentimes to bring the melody out, and even subtle things that are more advanced, like how to put in rubato, or how to put in a sense of ending a phrase and starting a new phrase. All of these things are not really included in the score. Sometimes composers do put specific instructions, but usually those, like crescendos or breath marks, but those usually are times when they want some musical effect that is different than the basic musicality. And so in Western music, the score is an important tool, but it's still only one part of it. And so when you're composing or arranging and you're writing down a score, the goal is to be as clear as possible, knowing that you're still also going to be relying upon this oral tradition to communicate a lot of basic musicality, a lot of how to play the piano or the violin, or how to sing, a lot of technique. Many of these things are not actually included in the score. So we want to focus on the parts that a score does do well. And scores are basically a stand-in, a substitute for memory. If you think about a musical tradition that's completely oral, then the only way that you can learn how to play a complete piece is if you completely memorize it. And you memorize it from right off the bat from examples. And in Western music, it's, theoretically it's possible that you could learn the Moonlight Sonata completely by listening to recordings, never looking at a score. But it'd be difficult because our music with a score has been able to become more complicated, more complex. And so the score really helps in being able to communicate more music and more complicated or more detailed music in some ways. The drawback to a score is that in musical traditions where everything is entirely oral, orally transmitted down over generations, there's a way in which music tends to change over time and develop, because nothing's perfectly recreated each generation. There's gradual changes over time. And in our system, though, since we have scores, there's never going to be any changes to the notes of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. The score is there, it's just set in stone, essentially, and there might be different interpretations, but in many crucial elements will never change because the score is just set and fixed. So there's advantages, and you might say disadvantages even, to having scores. But today we're going to look more closely at how to make the score look the best so that it communicates the most clearly. Best scores are legible and correctly spelled and visually attractive and efficient. I'm going to go through these. So, start with legibility. I hope up there in the room you can see this on the TV screen okay. So here I have Beethoven's manuscript for the Appassionata Sonata. And manuscript, in case you don't know the jargon in music publishing, manuscripts are actually supposed to be the nicely written best version that the composer would send to the publisher, so the publisher could then create the typeset and do the printed score that they publish. So this is Beethoven trying his best to write with good handwriting. and as you might know from Beethoven, if you've ever seen Beethoven's sketchbooks, his handwriting is abysmally atrocious, and this really is kind of the best he does. And you can see how this is like not legible, essentially. And even if you ignore like the coffee stains, which I think were not his fault, they came from later on. If you just look at the notation, you can see that he planned so poorly that this measure, he had to like draw extra extensions just to fit it on the page. And things don't even line up. It'd be very hard to read and learn from this score. Fortunately, Beethoven's publishers were able to translate what he wrote to them into something that's more legible. So, for example, this is the same music printed in a typeset score. And this is, you may recognize this version. This is the version that you see if you buy the Dover scores of Beethoven's sonatas. And so this is obviously much, much better than Beethoven's manuscript. But even here, you can see that there are maybe some problems. Like you can see the measure number here overlaps the slur. Things seem kind of cramped together. You can imagine if you need to write a note to your student in here about drawing a crescendo mark or drawing something else in here, there's just not much space for that. So this is an improvement for sure, but it's also not maybe ideal for legibility. And sometimes you can see things are crammed together, but you can also see a lot of improvements. The notes line up with themselves, so the beats and the rhythms are the same place on different lines, and the accidentals are placed correctly. The width of the whole staff system is uniform. If we go back to the previous one, you can see how that's not true here. Now, I mean, it's sort of fun to see Beethoven's manuscripts because you can sort of see his personality in his handwriting, which is a fun, interesting thing to see. But you wouldn't want to learn from this. That would not be a good score to learn from. Generally, we want to create legible scores. And nowadays, when many people would simply start composing by using computer programs are designed and programmed to automatically take care of a number of these things. So if Beethoven were being more careful than he was at the time, he would use a ruler and he would make sure to line up all of these rhythms on his manuscript, which he did not really do. A modern computer program would more automatically take care of those things. And I'll talk more about that in a bit, but that sometimes can lead to a sense of false security because many computer programs, especially the ones that are available for free online, like MuseScore and NoteFlight, they kind of do this, but not very well. And they certainly don't handle complicated situations well. Like, for instance, in MuseScore and NoteFlight, they wouldn't be able to handle this kind of trill with a grace note over a chord very well. You'd have to adjust things. So even when you use computer programs, it's still important to know a lot of these basic principles and rules so that you can go in and make sure your score actually looks professional. Okay, so the second principle is to correctly spell things. And this is something that overlaps a lot with the topic of music theory. But it's still important to take this into account. So musical spelling is similar, and by spelling here, I mean spelling notes in chords and melodies, rather than spelling the musical words, though that's important too. So musical spelling is similar to language spelling. So, in English, we have these words we call homophones, such as where, and where. And much like a E flat or a D sharp on a piano keyboard, where, and where all sound exactly the same. At least if you have sort of a standard American accent, they all sound the same. But when we use them in context, like if I say like, where are you going to wear that? Nobody has any confusion about which where I'm using in that sentence. So where are you going to wear that means the first where is W-H-E-R-E and the second where is W-E-A-R. And if you were writing in a more formal context, you would definitely know which one was which. There would be no confusion because the context of the sentence and the meanings of the words tell us which spelling to use, even though the sound I'm making is exactly the same. And so that basic principle translated to music is that E flat is not the same as D sharp. And that's just one example. You can carry it over to any enharmonic pair. For instance, F sharp is not the same as G flat, or B sharp is not the same as C natural. It all depends on the context that you're in. So spelling things correctly is very important. If I just back up once again to the Beethoven example here, in this measure here, the third full measure, this note in the left-hand chord of B natural, it's important that that's how it's spelled, because that's the note that would come from the C scale, the C major scale. B natural is the leading tone, and A flat needs to be A flat instead of G sharp because that's the sixth note in the C minor scale. And by spelling it correctly, Beethoven is showing us the musical logic, the chord progression, how these things are working, and the tensions, the dissonances that are involved in a C major or C minor scale that make this chord progression work. And this is something that's important to do in part because it makes it easier for musicians to read, but also because it's a sign, like if about whether the score seems like it's composed by somebody who knows what they're doing or not. And professional musicians especially don't have much patience for things, so it's good to help your students or help yourself by making sure these things are correctly spelled. And part of why I'm emphasizing this a lot is, for one thing, many of my students always ask/complain about the difference between E flat and D sharp, and it's a hard concept to explain at first, because on the piano keyboard it looks like it's the same key, but it's an important one to get across. But the second reason why it's important is because, again, to go back to computer music programs for music notation, the computer music programs are dumb. They just do what they're told, and they have algorithms inside of them that will tend to spell things in certain ways that may not be correct. And you, as a composer or arranger, would have to go in and fix it to make sure that something is spelled the correct way. One of the common ways that you can put notes into a computer music program is by connecting a MIDI keyboard to your computer and then playing your music into the computer. And that way especially tends to produce mistakes in spelling because the computer music program is not smart. It doesn't understand these things, and it will just put things down however it's programmed to do so, which often is not the correct way of spelling things. And so you have to go back and look at it to proofread to make sure that these things are spelled correctly. So that's something that can happen even if you have a student, or even if for you yourself, you understand these rules, but you're putting music into the computer in a certain way, the computer itself can mess it up. And so you have to go back and check these things for yourself too. All right, moving on. Another aspect, and this is maybe the most subjective of all of these, is that scores should be visually attractive. And so here's a excerpt from Träumerei by Schumann from Kindersehnen. And this is a example I think of, even though it's a little bit old-fashioned, I like it a lot. I feel like it looks really nice. And besides being clear, I feel like the proportion of the size of the note heads to the stems, the thickness of lines, the thickness of the curves in the braces and in the clefs, and the slurs and the ties, everything here just looks very nice. It feels smooth and appealing to move our eyes along the score as we're moving through this. Things feel nicely spaced. Doesn't feel like there's a lot of wasted space. This next one is actually a more modern setting of Träumerei, but this one I find to be a lot uglier. I feel like it looks spindly, looks like there's too much empty space around. It feels like the proportions of the note heads to the stems are off. And there's just something about this one that I find to be a lot uglier than the previous one. Now, of course, this is a subjective thing, but music publishers like, companies like G. Henley or Boosey and Hawkes or Schirmer or Alfred, they, to varying degrees, put in a lot of work to try and make scores look very visually appealing. And I don't know how closely you can see on the TV screen there, but if you look really closely at this example, you can see that the stem sits a little bit outside of the beam. And so you have this ugly little notch that's hard to pinpoint, but it just kind of makes everything seem a little bit haphazard. So this is something that's made in a computer program that the person who made this arrangement didn't really check for all these very fine details that would make it look more visually attractive. Whereas this one, even though it's much older, is set by music publishers. I think this is a German publisher called Breitkopf und Härtel. They're one of the major music publishers. And especially back in the 19th century, early 20th century. And you can tell that they not just didn't make it just clear, but they also put effort into making it look aesthetically and visually attractive. And given how many hours we spend staring at these scores when we're practicing music, it's good to make the score look more attractive. It helps us to feel more motivated to keep looking at it, whereas this might feel like, I don't want to look at this anymore, so I'm going to stop practicing. And that's one of the more subjective things, and it's also one of the more high-level things, but it's still something, it's a basic principle that's good to talk about. Finally, the other basic principle is efficiency. To make efficient scores, you want to fit as much music onto each page as you can without the music becoming too crowded. So computer music programs tend to format music in extremely inefficient ways at first. So they often put too few measures onto each line, and then they often have too few staff systems on each page. And so this might mean that you'd have a piece that could be efficiently put onto maybe 4 pages that would print out at first over 10 pages. And that's not efficient. So you need to have your students fix this problem when it comes up. One thing that's related, especially for us pianists, is trying to build in convenient page turns whenever possible. And so efficiency, if we jump back for a second to the Beethoven example, this, I mentioned earlier that this might be a little bit overly crowded. This might be maybe a tad too efficient in how it uses the space on the page, to the point where things seem really crowded. Here, even if you imagine that the measure number was not there, you can see the slur gets really close to the notes from the staff above it. And that might be a little too crowded. It might be a little bit too efficient. Again, this is sort of a subjective thing, and usually you have to do some experimenting and trial and error to come up with the best balance of having things be efficient but not be crowded on the page. And when you're writing things by hand, usually you can have a little more control, although as we saw from Beethoven's example here, you sort of need to pre-plan things in order to make it work. You know, if Beethoven maybe had drawn his bar lines first, then he maybe could have avoided having this problem. So especially the first full measure here, you see is extremely long. There's a lot of wasted empty space. He does not need to have this much space for those notes because they're just tied. And he could have avoided this if he had planned for it a bit better. But that's not really what he cared about, so he didn't. Okay, so those are the first four very basic principles to keep in mind when you're putting music down into a score. All right, so I'm still a major proponent for handwriting scores, particularly when somebody is still a student, because I feel like there's still a better connection between the hand and the brain when writing by hand. That helps the student learn these principles much better than if they start directly with a computer program. And another advantage of writing by hand first is that, as we'll see in a minute, the free computer music programs that are available online, like MuseScore and NoteFlight, are ultimately just not very good. Like they provide a very basic function, but for anybody who's serious about being a composer, they don't cut it. And what you would need to do if you are a serious composer or a serious composition student is you would need to shell out the $600 to buy the better programs, but that's a big investment to do. And so writing music by hand at first can help make sure the student learns and is really committed to composing before you make an investment like into a program like Finale or Sibelius, which is really the programs that a serious student or a serious composer should be using. So for handwriting scores, the basic tools that one needs: you need a good quality pencil, and I like to use mechanical pencils, like nice ones, though, you know, whatever pencil feels good and helps the student work is fine. And then you want a good quality eraser, so that you can, instead of scratching things out, you can just erase things and try things again. And then you want a 6-inch transparent plastic ruler. So this is something you can actually get pretty easily at like a Staples or Office Max or from Amazon. And this is really good for aligning the ruler over the music staff so that you can draw straight lines for things like bar lines, so that they are 90 degrees against the staff lines. And you can also use it, since it's transparent, you can also draw really good beams between 8th notes and 16th notes, that kind of thing. And 6 inches is a lot more manageable than a 12-inch ruler. Just from my own experience, like if you're working on music, it's just a lot handier to have a 6-inch ruler. It's easier to maneuver, it doesn't get in the way as much. And I feel like back when I used a 12-inch ruler for this kind of thing, I was often poking myself in my own stomach because when I was at the bottom of the page, the ruler was just, too long. For longer purposes, I like a 15-inch metal cork-backed ruler. So those are like longer rulers, usually made of some kind of flexible steel that have cork on the back so that it lands more softly. That's really useful if you have anybody who's working on composing pieces for orchestra or for a band, large choir, where they're using larger paper and they need to draw bar lines that go across multiple staves, multiple inches. So for music staff paper, letter sized 8.5 by 11 is good to have for basic stuff. But I'm also a big fan of the large format landscape music paper. And I'm going to turn off the screen share so I can show you what I'm talking about. So here, this is what I like to do my composing on at first, my drafts. So this is large format, wide landscape. And the reason why I like this is because inevitably when I'm working, my musical ideas tend to get limited by the size of the paper I'm working on. So if I'm working on 8.5 by 11 paper, my phrases, my musical ideas have a tendency to just fill up that small amount of space. And this is also a problem with computer music programs, where the size of the staff on the computer screen can also limit the musical ideas. When I compose using this, like a wide format score, it means that my ideas don't become limited by the physical space that I'm working with. My ideas can be as long as I want them to be, or as short as I want them to be. So it gives me more flexibility and freedom when I'm composing to really make sure that my ideas have the breathing room to develop as I want them to, rather than feeling hemmed in by paper that's too narrow. Letter size paper is great. Like if we have this paper that's this size, it's great for writing words because it doesn't feel like we're limiting ourselves. But music just takes more physical space to develop and get it down. If you think about scores that you teach from or you read from, oftentimes even short phrases go at least a line plus more space. And the wide format score, I think, is really useful for just freeing the imagination to not be limited by that. Okay, I'm going to go back to PowerPoint. And then the last thing is French curves. So French curves are a drawing tool that any of you who have done art or drawing or design may be familiar with. They're a set of plastic, usually they're plastic, very curvy little things that have a bunch of different kinds of curves on it. And they're kind of like a ruler, a straight edge, but for curves. And so it lets you draw very nice slurs, very nice ties in a way that looks really nice and looks really regular and beautiful. If you have somebody who is very good at drawing, maybe French curves are not necessary. And I can show you what these things look like here. So French curves are tools that look like this. And how they work is they have a lot of different slopes to the curve. So you can find a spot that fits into your phrase and you can trace it in order to create a slur or a tie. And you see there's lots of different places. So you can do steeper slurs or ties. You can do shallower things. You can find lots of different places on these. And usually they come in sets of 3. So I have 2 other ones here. So between the 3 of them, you can find the size and slope and shape you're looking for in order to draw a really nice slur or a really nice tie. Now, for a lot of these things, if you're just doing drafts of a piece or just basic ideas, then you don't need to be quite as meticulous and careful. But when you're producing a final draft of a piece, then it's really important to make sure that if you're doing it by hand, that you use all these tools to help with that. All right. Sorry, I think there might be thunder and lightning here in Portland or something. Anyway, just got distracted by that. Moving on. Computer notation software. So the best basic free options include, I've already mentioned them a few times, there's MuseScore and NoteFlight. And both of these are relatively easy to just start using. You can go to the website, you can start putting music into a score right away. It looks relatively nice. Since they're free, they don't give you as much control to make sure the score looks really nice and professional. However, they are the best basic free options. And sometimes, like I said, I tend to prefer having my students write by hand, but ultimately, if a student simply refuses to work by hand, but I still want them to learn how to compose, I'll let them use MuseScore or NoteFlight instead, just so that I don't create a real barrier to what they're trying to do. LilyPond is a special case, and it's also a free program. It's one of those open source programs, like a Linux kind of thing. And it actually produces really nice looking scores. However, it requires basic coding abilities. So most music programs, like MuseScore, NoteFlight, but also the higher level ones like Finale and Sibelius, they basically work on your computer screen, it looks like you're looking at a sheet of music paper. And then you either use your mouse or the keyboard or a MIDI keyboard, you put notes in the measure and fill in music that way. So it's very visual, and it's trying to approximate roughly what you'd be doing if you were composing by hand. LilyPond, however, how you create your scores, you actually type in lines of code into a text file, and then you have it render it or put the code through its process, and then it produces a score. So this is something that really is only a good option for somebody who maybe is good at coding already. And I know a lot of kids these days actually do some computer coding classes or workshops when they're still quite young. So it's definitely an option to consider if you have the right student in mind. Or if you yourself happen to be good at computer coding, it's actually might be a really nice option, and it's free. But it does take specialized ability and more time at first to learn how to use it. The best high-level programs are Finale and Sibelius, and these two programs have been around for a long time now. I've been using Finale since 1995, and Sibelius has been around that long as well. And you often, if you talk to composers or people who use them, you often find people are very much attached to whichever one that they use, Finale or Sibelius. And it's often like, being a fan of the Red Sox or the Yankees. It feels a bit like that. Personally, I find that in general, they've been roughly equal to each other, and that Finale is, you get slightly more control over being able to do anything you want, absolutely anything you want, but it can often be kind of hard to figure out how to do it. Sibelius, you can't quite do anything you want to do, but the program's a little bit easier to use off the bat. However, that's kind of the old wisdom. Unfortunately, the new situation is that, so you probably know how like a lot of computer programs have switched from how you buy them. So it used to be that if you wanted Microsoft Word and Microsoft Office, you would just pay a few $100s and you'd have it. And then if they have an upgrade, you would pay some more money and you'd have the upgrade. But it's like you're buying one thing at a time. But a lot of computer programs now have changed to a subscription model, where now if you want Microsoft Office, instead of paying like $300 one time, you pay, I don't know, $60 a year, and you just keep paying that. And then the updates are automatic, but you're paying it over time. And And same thing with Adobe programs. And then it's also true of a lot of computer and video games now work that way. So Sibelius recently switched to that payment model, where now you have to subscribe to Sibelius. Finale, for the time being, is still you just pay a lump sum and you have it. And for me, this basically makes me feel like that's tipped the scale in favor of Finale as the one that you should get if you're considering this. And the reason why is because, well, both Sibelius and Finale have really bad customer support. And that's really annoying. But if you're paying a lump sum, you get the program, and the customer support is not great, then at least you have the program and you can just learn how to use it yourself, and you can figure out your own problems, and you can go, there's like forums online where other people figure out problems and you can like learn from their mistakes. To me, it just seems really egregious that a program like Sibelius that doesn't give good customer support would do a subscription model, because then you end up paying a lot more money over time, and they don't even provide good customer support, even to the level that, say, Microsoft Office provides okay customer support and Adobe provides okay customer support. So it's partly a financial thing, but also I feel like it doesn't make sense for a program like Sibelius to charge things that way. If you're interested in either of them, I still suggest you check them out and see which one you like better, but just keep that in mind, that that's kind of been a very recent change in the balance between these two programs. Okay, so professional score formatting. So for everyday purposes, the standard American paper sizes are perfectly fine, and those are these three sizes. The letter size, which is the most common, 8.5 by 11 inches. There's the legal size, 8.5 by 14 inches, and then there's tabloid size, 11 by 17. So the tabloid size is just letter size doubled. So you can see the 11 is the same, but 8.5 times 2 is 17. So tabloid's literally 2 letter pages put next to each other. And the legal size is an interesting case because it's mostly only used by organ scores, like pieces composed for organ. I don't know if any of you are organists or have seen organ scores, but they're uniquely kind of like much wider than other scores, and they lay out further, and they're usually legal size, like 2 legal size sheets of paper laid out landscape next to each other. And for some reason, that's just the organ tradition, but that's just for organists, really. Tabloid size paper can be useful if you're writing for orchestra or band. Letter sized is more useful if you're writing for piano solo or maybe a violin sonata or something like that, writing a song. However, for professional contexts, there's slightly different sized paper. So you've probably noticed this actually, if you try and photocopy scores, you have to use the reduce function, reducing it down to like 93%. And that's because most piano scores are actually 9 by 12 inches instead of 8.5 by 11. And the same thing is true of parts. And this is so common that the term for 9 by 12 size paper is actually concert size, because this format, this size of paper, is used so much by music publishers and not by anybody else that they call it concert size. Occasionally you'll find concert size scores that are actually 9.5 by 12.5 inches, which is a little bit bigger, but 9 by 12 is really nice size for piano scores, parts, and also things like if you have students who are writing songs, or like I said, a violin sonata or a string quartet, like smaller chamber groups, this concert size is really nice. I said scores here, I meant large scores like a orchestra, band. The tabloid size still works pretty well. Or custom dimensions that match the size of the score for readability. So this is good and all, but it's hard to find people or printers even that can handle concert size, because most printers you come across are standardized to these 3 up here, and 9 by 12 just does not fit well into that at all. Occasionally, companies like FedEx or Staples print centers can handle unique sizes, but that's a little bit dicey because usually their printers can't actually print paper this size directly. What they do is they'll just print it on larger paper and then cut it down after the fact, which does not work as well. That leads to inconsistencies. Fortunately, if you have serious students or yourself are serious about publishing or having professional score formatting, there is this amazing company that I've used for a long time now. It's called Black Ribbon Printing. BlackRibbonPrinting.com. They're based in Colorado and Los Angeles now too. They're a company that specializes specifically in music printing, and they can print in many formats and many paper sizes, and they do all kinds of professional style music bindings, like using tape bindings for parts and scores. And their prices are really very reasonable, and they're as happy to print one score at a time and ship it to you as they are to do large orders. And they're very responsive. Like if you send in inquiries at their website, they'll get back to you pretty quickly. And then they also print these things and ship them to you really quickly. And this might seem a bit complicated and fussy to do, but if for better or for worse, in the world of composing, let's say you have a student who's wants to go to a conservatory for composing to study composition. Sending in a score that looks really nice and is printed on professional size paper is simply going to make them stand out in a way. And in some ways that doesn't seem like it should be fair or relevant, but unfortunately it does matter a lot. And looking into these things can help your student in ways that are really important. You can think of it as being similar to how if you had a student who was auditioning at Juilliard to be a piano major, you'd make sure that they wore something appropriate for their outfit, no shorts and t-shirt. And in some ways, if you really think about it, should the clothes really matter? If they play well, they play well. But we know it does matter, in whether you think it's fair or not unfair or relevant or irrelevant. These things do end up mattering, and having notation, having a score that looks good in all the ways, including how it's printed and how it's bound and what size the paper is. All this stuff really does matter a lot, and it can even lead to subtle things that make a difference. Like if you have a student who does a composition workshop, and the professional musicians see that their parts are printed on professional size paper, and it looks really good, they're gonna take it a little bit more seriously than if it's printed on cheap paper and doesn't look good. And again, that may not seem fair or relevant, but it simply is how these things work most of the time, many times. So it's a pretty easy to look at website. You can go and take a look at it. The backup options, of course, are things like FedEx or Staples printing centers. Generally, they can't handle the custom paper sizes. If you go with FedEx or Staples or other kind of printing centers like that, I'd recommend maybe keeping your paper size like this so that it still looks the best and doesn't run into the problems of them saying, oh yeah, we can cut it down to the right size. Because I just wouldn't trust them to do it well enough. Even if it's slightly off page to page, it would look weird, and you don't want it to look weird. Okay, so now I want to transition into looking at some very specific rules and details about notation. So I'm going to switch over now to a different program and look at the nuts and bolts of notation. So like I said, this document I'm showing you now, I'll make available to you, and including the PowerPoint we just looked at as well. And I can also send you my source for a lot of these rules, which is this book that's out of print. It's called The Art of Music Engraving and Processing. And this book it's really just a few chapters from the book, but it's something I got when I was an undergrad major in composition at Oberlin, and it's simply amazing. It goes through all these different situations, showing you exactly how you should have all the notation issues. So especially if and you can see there's like these big tables that show lots of different situations, exactly how to make things look. So I can share that with you as well, but I'm going to go over the ones I find to be the most crucial for making scores look really good. So to start with, we're going to talk about stems. So the basic rule is that stems should extend for 1 octave, that is 3.5 spaces, from the vertical center of the note head. So if you look closely at this first one here, middle C, you can see that the stem really comes from the center of the note head, right where the middle C ledger line is. And it comes off the far right of the note. And then, if you watch how far it goes all the way up until the next C, because the next C up would be on this space. And so you can talk about it as being 1 octave higher or 3.5 spaces. So there's 1 space, 2 space, 3 space, and then half a space up there. And then here I have the next C, an octave higher, and now since it's above the middle line, the stem is coming down off the left, and you can see that it comes all the way down to exactly where the middle C ledger line is. And this is how to draw a stem so that it looks like the correct length. And then here I have another example of a G, and it extends all the way up to where the next G up would be, and then I have this G going back down. So you can see an example of a similar thing. And I have a few examples here in the bass clef where it follows the same rule. So when you have notes that are further away using ledger lines, then the stems on notes 2 ledger lines or more outside the staff should extend to the center line. So you can see here I have all these notes up high on the treble clef. All the stems go all the way down to the center line. And so in that case, all of them are longer than an octave, but they all go to the center line. Here in the left hand, the bass clef, you can see the first 2 notes extend to the center line. And then the D technically is not 2 ledger lines, but it's following the first rule of going an octave, because it goes all the way down to the D line, and the middle C extends down here. So that's how a mix of those kinds of notes would look. And then here I just have more examples of how this works. In piano music especially, we often have low bass notes that are written with ledger lines instead of 8VA. So this is how like a low C looks and how far you would draw the stem. It's like over 2 octaves long stem, but that's how it would look. Continuing with stems, so the stem direction changes at the center line with the center line of the staff, with the stem on notes on the center line usually going down by default. So you can see here, if I'm going up the C major scale, that all the stems are going up until the B, which is on the center line, is now going down. And then they continue being down, going up. And here in the bass clef, I have the C major scale descending, and then the D here is on the center line. It's still going down, and then it switches to up after that. So that's the basic default thing that works most of the time. However, there's always exceptions to make music scores look better. Stem direction from the center line can change to up if it conforms to a pattern that has a majority of stems going down. It should say up, stems going up. So for instance here in the treble clef, you can see I've got 3 notes, the stems all go up, but then the B goes down. And that looks a little bit awkward. It's preferable in this case to make that stem go up instead. So it looks smoother, it looks more visually appealing. It's also a little bit clearer to read because when we're reading music notation, we often look to the stems and or any beams or flags to tell us what the rhythm is. So this makes it easier to see that these are 4 quarter notes in a row when all the stems are going up. In the bass clef, I have a similar example that we might see often in elementary piano music, where we have a basic triad outlined. And here's a similar thing where the D stem goes down here, but it looks more awkward, so it's preferable in this case to have the D stem go up so it matches the other 3 notes. Okay, so moving on to stem direction for chords or intervals. So stem direction is up when the interval below the middle line is greater than above the middle line. It is down when the interval above the middle line is larger. So here in this first measure, I've got E and B, and the B is in the center, but the E is below. So the E being below tells us the stem should go up. Here, I've got the same B, and the F is the fifth above, so we have the stem going down instead. So that's just intervals, and that seems pretty clear. Over here in the next measure, though, it's a little bit more subtle of a thing. You can see I've got G, B, and C, and then G, B, and D. In this case, the first one, the stem goes up, because the G is farther from the middle than the C is. So it's further away. It's the furthest note out, so it determines the stem direction. Whereas here, the D and the G are equally distant from the center, and so the center note usually goes down, and so the stem goes down. And of course, if this were in a little progression, we might have the stem go up just to match, but this is just an example of how these things tend to go. Here in the bass clef, I've got slightly more complicated examples, where here I've got this spaced out C major chord, and 1 note's above the line, and then 2 notes are below the line. And the 2 notes below the line are farther away from the center line, so the stem goes up in this case. Here, I've got 2 notes above the center line and only 1 below, and the top note is farther from the center line than the bottom note, and because of those things, the stem goes down. One thing, you'll have these for your reference, of course, but also keep in mind that you're probably used to seeing these rules applied correctly. So sometimes if you aren't sure which one it is, you can try both ways. And if one of the ways looks wrong, it probably is, because you're used to seeing professionally published music all the time. Over here, we've got these 9th chords, like you might see in Debussy, and here the stem goes up because the bottom 2 notes are farther from the center line than the upper 2 notes. Here the stem goes down because the upper 2 notes are farther from the center line than the bottom 2 notes. It's almost a little bit like you're on a boat and you're kind of balancing one way or the other depending on where the weight is distributed. Sort of a visual metaphor like that. So F here, this rule, when the outer notes are equidistant from the middle line, the stem direction is determined by how many notes are above or below the middle line. If above, the stem is down. If below, the stem is up. So that's what these examples are here. So what that means is, if you look at the right hand here, the center line is B, the top note is A, which is a 7th above B, and here the bottom note is C, which is a 7th below B. So in this case, the outer notes, the top and the bottom, are the same distance from the center line. But in this one, the stem goes up because there are more notes below the center line, and here the stem goes down because there are more notes above the center line. Again, it's basically that idea of balancing. In the left hand, I have a slightly simpler version of the same thing, where there's just one more note in the bottom here, so the stem goes up, and here I move to the top and the stem goes down. Again, often if you try writing these down both directions, one of them will usually seem like the wrong direction because we're used to seeing things done the right way. Okay, so now this is probably the most sort of complicated part here, but it's really important, especially for piano music, where we have all kinds of seconds in chords all the time. In chords with seconds, the upper note of the second is always on the right of the stem. The lower note of the second is always on the left of the stem. So in chords with seconds, the upper note, so here we have C and D. The D is upper note, so it's always on the right of the stem, and then the C is on the bottom, it's always on the left of the stem. And then you can see how that works out here. And the note, so in seconds, like they're written like this because if they were written right over each other, they would overlap and you couldn't read what the notes are. And so they put them side by side like this so you can more easily see both notes. Now, here with this F chord that has a D on it, the D is, the technical music publishing term for that is that the D is suspended to the right. And whereas over here with this chord, we'd say that the B is suspended to the left. So basically when you have a chord with multiple notes, the note of the second that's kind of off by itself is called the suspended note. And which note is suspended depends on the stem direction. So if the stem is going up, then the upper note of the second is suspended. If the stem is going down, then the lower note of the second is suspended. And so these are some of the trickiest chords to write out by hand because it's hard to know how this works. The most important thing first is to learn this part, that the upper note of the second is always on the right, the lower note is always on the left, and that's independent of any other notes that are in the chord. So the other notes of the chord still, the stem direction is chosen based on rule F up here, E and F. So the stem direction is still chosen by those rules, and then we put the second at the appropriate side after putting all those other notes over there. So here, these chords, the stem goes up, and then the second, so when the stem goes up, all the notes are on the left side of the stem. And so we stack the E on top of the F major chord because the E is always on the left of the stem, and so are the other notes, and so they all get stacked together. And then the F here, the upper note of the second, is always on the right, so it gets stuck out to the side. When you have multiple seconds in a chord, like with this D7 chord, the basic D minor chord, the stem goes down. All the note heads are on the right side of the stem. The seconds, the D is the upper note, so it's always on the right side of the stem. The C is always on the left side of the stem because it's the lower of the two notes of the second. Because of that, we stack the notes like this, so that the upper note of the second is on the left side, and so are the other two notes in the middle. The C's are the notes that are off to the left by themselves. Now the last part of this rule is that the note heads that determine stem direction are vertically aligned. So what that means is here in this last measure, you can see I've got multiple chords where there are seconds, and you can see here that the stems themselves are actually not vertically aligned. The stems are a note head apart from each other. And that's because the note heads that are determining the stem direction, those are vertically aligned. So in the bottom chord, it's the notes that are on the right that determine stem direction, and up here is the notes on the left. So those notes get aligned with each other. And then over here I just have another example that shows it kind of going the other direction. So This is why maybe if you write these out by hand and you try and make the stems align, it just looks kind of wrong, and you aren't sure why. It's because this is actually the rule followed by music publishers generally. All right. So far we haven't had any accidentals. And accidentals are another important thing to be able to write, and it's also a fairly complicated thing to understand. So the simplest thing is if you have accidentals on intervals that are sevenths or larger, then the accidentals are simply stacked vertically. That is, put directly above each other. So if it's an octave or a tenth or a seventh or a 12th, then these accidentals just get put directly over each other. Now it's sevenths are larger because if you have a sixth or anything smaller, then the accidentals will start to overlap with each other. You can see in the seventh there's only a little bit of space left. If you had a sixth, they would be bunching up against each other and it'd be harder to read. And anything a fifth or smaller, they would definitely be overlap. So sixths or smaller, the rule is that you have the upper accidental is always closer, the lower accidental is further from the note head. And I have a number of examples here. I have a mix of flats and sharps and naturals, and I forgot to include double sharps and double flats in here, but those follow the same rule. And so you can kind of see, especially in the smallest intervals, that if I tried to put these right over each other, they would just overlap and you couldn't read what was going on. And this is also a really good rule that even if you don't have a student who's composing necessarily, for students who are learning to read music, is also a good rule to tell them, because a lot of times my students misread seconds that have multiple accidentals. This is especially common in minor keys when we have the harmonic minor scale. And knowing that the upper note accidental is closer can help them know which note is which. I mean, I feel like I've many times had students, if they're playing a piece in E minor and they have an augmented second interval where you have a C natural and a D sharp, they'll play it as a as a C sharp and a D natural because they aren't sure which note the sharp is in front of. This telling them about this rule can help them with that. So this rule also applies to chords where there are multiple notes, multiple accidentals. So in a chord, when you have an interval of a sixth or less with accidentals, the same rule applies. So you can hear of a C sharp minor chord, these sharps are arrayed like that. And the C minor chord here, they're arrayed like this too because it's a sixth. So K, when the chord contains a suspended note that is a second, on the right of the stem with an interval of a sixth or less, the accidental and suspended note should be closer than the other one. Finale gets this wrong. So this is the one exception where in this first chord you can see that the D natural is closer than the G sharp, but since the G sharp is suspended to the right, the G sharp should actually be closer and look like this. This is something that even Finale gets wrong, and so you have to go in and fix it to make it look correct. So if you have chords with accidentals where the outer interval is a seventh or more, like here, then those accidentals still get stacked like that. And then the remaining accidentals go off to the left. If you have a chord like this, this is number 2, if the top and bottom notes are less than the interval of a seventh, then the highest accidental is nearest to the note head. The lowest is further left, the remaining is furthest left. And so you can see I have this sort of characteristic shape that's actually kind of similar to how a key signature looks. The top is closest, the bottom is next closest, and then the last one is off to the side. Number 3 here is similar to rule K up above. If you have a note that's suspended off to the side, then that accidental is closest. And then the top, and then the outer one. And then finally here we have another suspended note out to the side, but the interval is an octave, so you stack those notes on top of each other. That's the 4th rule here. And then some more of these. So if the top note is suspended to the right and is less than the interval of a seventh from the bottom note, then the accidental suspended note is nearest, the lowest is further left, the remaining furthest left. So that's what this one looks like. Rule number 2 here, if the middle note is suspended to the right while the top and bottom notes are less than a seventh apart, then the accidental for the suspended note is closest, the top is further left, the bottom furthest left. Again, these tend to create these characteristic kind of up and down shapes that are similar to key signatures. 3, if the bottom note is suspended to the left and the interval is less than a seventh, then the top accidental is nearest, the middle furthest to the left, the bottom furthest to the left. So this is the one that looks a little bit different from the others, where it kind of diagonally goes down like that. And that's simply because the D is suspended off to the left here. So if the bottom note is suspended to the left and the interval is less than a seventh, then the top accidental is nearest, middle furthest to the left, bottom rule number 4. If the bottom note is suspended to the left and the interval is a seventh or larger, then the top 2 accidentals are vertically aligned and the suspended notes is to the left. So that's here where this note gets off to the side while these 2 are aligned. And then 5, finally, is when you have a suspended note in the middle, then the lowest note is closest, followed by the top note, and then the suspended note is furthest to the left. So that's here, this example. Bottom, top, middle, out like that. So, rule N is that chords involving 4 or more notes extrapolate these principles, meaning they just kind of carry them further, as seen in these examples. So here we've got 4 notes. The outer notes are a seventh, so they're stacked on top of each other. Then the second highest note is here, and the third highest note's out there, furthest to the left. And this is the same arrangement, even though it's spread out farther. And then here we have a similar layout where the outer notes are over each other, the sharps, and then we have the suspended notes closer, and then the last one's out like that. So a lot of times with 4 or 5 or more notes that all have accidentals in a chord, you just have to try and take these basic rules and then carry them further out. Okay, so moving on to talk a bit about rhythm. So rhythm is very important to get correct. And this is another thing where music programs, computer music programs, will often put things down in really bad ways, ways that are really unclear. So here we have a very common rhythm that students write, especially since a lot of students compose kind of in a pop music inflected style where they have these characteristic syncopated rhythms. So this first measure and the second measure are the same rhythm, but the first measure is extremely unclear. The second measure is clear. And this is how it should be written. The difference is that the second measure shows where every single beat in the measure is. Beat 1, 2, 3, 4. This one's unclear because we don't know where beats 2 and 3 are. And so this is very difficult to read, whereas this is relatively easy to read. So the rule is that rhythms should be notated to show where the primary beats in a measure are, even if it is highly syncopated. I think a lot of students, when they're composing, think about rhythm additively, as in they're just adding note values one after the other, and so they tend to write rhythms like this. It kind of makes sense to them, when really rhythm in a time signature is hierarchical. The beat structure is still there, and the rhythms fit into the beat structure, even when it is syncopated, and so you have to show the beat structure in order to read it easily. So I have another example of this. In example P, I have 3 rhythms that are all the same. And again, the first one is extremely unclear and misreading to lead because, again, we don't know where the beats are. Example 2 is clearer, but still very hard to read. So we do technically have rests on all the beats 2, 3, and 4, but it's still like a jumble of symbols that it's hard to read at first. The third example is the clearest. because see how I use the beams and extend the beams over the rests, and I even have little stems that show where the rests are. This shows us exactly where each beat is and how the notes fit into the beat. Now this notation is actually kind of a more modern one. You don't see it in a lot of older scores, but it's definitely a newer and more preferred way to notate rhythms that are like this, to have the beams extend over the rests so we can see easily where each beat is and where each note fits into each beat. All right, so speaking of beams, beams are half a space thickness and usually sit on the line or space a seventh above the note head. So we all know that eighth note, 16th note beams are thicker, but their thickness is actually exactly half the space between two lines on the staff. And that's what makes them look like the right thickness. This is again an excellent way to use that 6-inch ruler if you're drawing by hand, we talked about earlier. Beams are angled based on the first and last note. And a lot of times this actually causes the length of the stems to change. And so here, I'm not going to go into all the nitty-gritty details, but if you get this handout from me and you go into it, they actually have this whole set of pages where they show exactly how you should angle the beams and stems to create the right look for all these different shapes and sizes of intervals with eighth note beams. So this is very useful if you want to get into that level of detail, and so I'll make this available to you as well. But here I just want to draw attention to how in the last three of these, the G, the stem goes the same distance each time, and the beam is at the same place each time, the same angle. And so the F, then the D, and then the C have progressively longer stems to make that look the right way. In groups with multiple beams, the first and last notes determine the angle of the beams, while the overall range of notes determines how high the stems will reach. So here in the first one, we see a very typical 16th note pattern where the last stem is actually a lot shorter than it would be if it were a quarter note, but it looks right because the angle of the beams is correct. And then over here, the last two beats, here we have the A and the B are the first and last notes, so the beam is angled up from the A up to the B, despite what the C and the D are doing. This last one, the C and the D are the same, but the first and last notes are the same, so now these 16th note beams are flat because they're one note to the same note. All right, and then finally, I just wanted to give a few examples of incorrect spellings that are common. So here in Rule T, what we have are misspellings of chords that basically use notes that are not part of the correct scale. So here I've got a C minor, like a 1-5-1 progression. And this is especially common when people just use computer music programs. I'll often see the B natural spelled as C flat instead of that. And so this is be the wrong spelling, and this is the correct spelling. So you want to make sure to proofread or have your students proofread their scores to fix those mistakes. You want to make sure they use the appropriate note from the scale of the key the music is in. C flat is not in the C minor scale. B natural is. Over here, we're still in C minor, and here we've got a G sharp, and that would be incorrect because in C minor, it'd be an A flat. You want to be careful around intervals of augmented sixths and minor sevenths and diminished sevenths. So here, this progression, this spelling would be wrong because it's basically an F major. You want a B flat because that's from the F major scale. A sharp makes an augmented sixth with the C, and that's a different interval. It resolves differently than the minor seventh does. And here, an even subtler one is you have a fully diminished seventh chord that resolves to C major, and you have a G sharp on top. It really should be an A flat because that's the note that comes from the C scale, the G sharp, that interval would that would imply this is a chord from A minor or A major, and should resolve as such. That being said, you probably know especially from Romantic era music, that a lot of times composers compose their music with these ambiguities deliberately in mind. I'm thinking especially of Schubert, who likes to revel in these ambiguities. But if you look at his scores, he usually spells them the correct way for each time. So Schubert might spell it the one way and then go to a wrong key for a few measures, and then he'll spell it the right way and go back to the correct key. So he still spells them the right way, even though he's exploiting the ambiguity of the two intervals being the same yet not the same. So spelling triads that have more sharps or flats often leads to mistakes, like spelling B major, B, E flat, C, or F sharp, or spelling E flat minor as E flat, F sharp, B flat. So those are things to check out for, especially common with the chords that are from the opposite side of the circle of fifths. And then, if you have students or if you yourself write atonal music that does not have a key signature, then you should write notation in a way that makes it the easiest to read and the easiest to play. So here I have the same notes, the same keys you'd play in the piano. In the first measure, they're spelled very misleadingly, unnecessarily complicated. And here they're spelled in a way where it shows you the shape of the chord you're playing better, and it's easier to read. So, because here, this first chord looks like it's a third and a sixth, and then C double sharp is hard to read. Here, though, this shows the actual shape of the chord better, where it's actually like 2/4 stacked on top of each other. So if you do have any students who write atonal music, or if you do yourself, just go with the simplest way of writing things, rather than using complicated accidentals. And then the final thing here is just make sure you spell augmented seconds correctly in minor scales, so that you have like F minor doesn't have a C and a C sharp, or a D flat and then F flat, but you want to make sure that they spell that interval correctly. All right, so those are a lot of the most important rules. There are many, of course, many others, but those are the ones I find the most crucial. And yeah, so learning about these things and applying them as you compose or have your students compose will help them have scores that look professional, and be easy to read, and they'll be clear. And yeah, so I hope that this has been helpful. And are there any questions people have?
So your handout has all the ones that you printed out?
Yes.
Like, you can print out the handout, it's gonna have all the examples that you wrote out.
Exactly, yeah.
Good, yeah, because that's really helpful. That's a good resource to have to go back to. Instead of trying to memorize it all.
And then
Yes.
the PDF file. PDF file.
Is that
Sorry.
a PDF?
Sorry, I couldn't quite hear you.
He's asking if it's in a PDF file. that
Yes,
handout.
it'll be in a PDF. Mhm.
Yeah, that's really good to have, because I know I've messed around sometimes when it's seconds and I'm trying to figure it out and it just looks weird, and I never knew what the rules were, so that's really helpful.
Yeah, no, definitely you'll have the handouts, and that's good, because those are the kind of rules that are hard to memorize. If you compose a lot over time, you start to remember them if you refer to them a lot. And so, yeah.
Yeah, good. My other question is unrelated, sort of. So how did you end up in Portland?
Mm-hmm.
Like from wherever, you said Massachusetts, or where did you say you're from?
Oh, I'm from Massachusetts originally,
Okay.
but before Portland, I was living in San Diego. That's where I did my doctoral degrees at UC San Diego. And so we ended up in Portland because I knew I didn't want to go into academia. I wanted to work as a freelance musician and teacher. And so we were looking at a number of cities around the country, and basically sort of medium, large cities. Like, we didn't want to go to a city as intense as New York City or Los Angeles, but I wanted to go to a place that had enough work that I could make a living as a musician, performer, and teacher. And so we explored a number of cities like Portland and Pittsburgh, and we thought about like Minneapolis, St. Paul, but we had the most connections to Portland, the most friends here already, and my wife had spent time here in the past, and it has the most of the things that we like to do. Besides music, we like hiking, we like forests, we like wine tasting, we're book people. Everything was just kind of lining up for Portland to seem like the best place for us to go, and so we did. And so far it's just been really amazing.
So how long have you been in Portland? How long have you been in Portland?
4.5 years.
Okay, yeah. Okay. Well, we're glad you're here.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been really great being in OMTA and meeting everybody and getting to know people over the time. Yeah. Are there any other questions or comments or anything?
What's the best place to buy a French curve? Because I live in Hermiston, not that many music stores around here.
Yeah, so actually, usually you can't find them at a music store, but the best place to buy them would be either Michael's or Joann's Fabrics. Both of them will have it, but basically any store that does a lot of crafts and art supplies, like if it's a place where you can buy really nice colored pencils and easels and paint for doing crafts, then they'll probably have a few sets of French curves. So yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. They also tend to have other nice accessories like, one thing I like to use for composing, if I can find it here. I just got myself a new one, there's this big clipboard. You can see how big it is. So
Yeah.
I haven't even opened it yet, but this is something where I can like sit on a chair and have my score on my lap and have enough support to actually write on it. You can get that kind of thing there. And they have lots of rulers and nice pencils and really high quality erasers. It's basically the best place to go for composing supplies. It's actually a craft store, not a music store. And then the music paper I like to compose on, this stuff, it's hard to find in a physical music store usually. I get it on Amazon. And that's, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Can you comment on the night flight? Note flight.
Yeah, anything in particular you want me to comment on, or?
Well, I'm familiar with the youth store, but not the other one.
Yeah, so Note Flight, I'm more familiar with Note Flight than MuseScore myself, because I teach a music theory course for one of the youth symphonies here in Portland, and we use Note Flight to do their assignments and stuff. Note Flight, I think it's similar to MuseScore in a lot of ways. In my experience, I think they try and market themselves more to teachers because they have like an education mode where you can create you can create templates online that are like digital worksheets, and then each student can fill it out, and then it saves them individually so I can grade them. As far as directly for composing, though, I think it's pretty similar to MuseScore. I don't think it has anything that's so much better than MuseScore that it's worth jumping over. Both MuseScore and Note Flight, they are pretty good warm-ups for if you ever want to jump to something like Finale or Sibelius, because the way you put notes in is pretty similar in those. Note Flight is, like MuseScore, one of its biggest drawbacks is that you can't control the fine details of how the music looks in the same way you can with Finale or Sibelius. So a lot of times, to really publish a good score, you need to go in and do a lot of fine tuning and editing of how the notation looks. And that's something you can do in Finale and Sibelius, but you can't do in MuseScore or Noteflight. So in my experience, Noteflight and MuseScore are pretty equivalent. I think Noteflight is trying to market itself more to teachers, like I said, but for composers, they're about the same quality level. And yeah, and then if there's anything else that distinguishes them. I mean, I feel like the Noteflight user interface, like how it looks on the screen, just looks a little bit nicer than MuseScore, but that's very minor cosmetic difference. Doesn't really affect how the score looks in the end.
Can you save it to the cloud?
Yes. On Noteflight, you can save things to the cloud. That's the default. Actually, I don't think it's not easy to save it to your personal computer on Noteflight.
Whereas before you can save your personal computer and not have to have it.
Was there anything else about?
Oh, I like Noteflight better. I use MuseScore when I'm doing like band stuff because that works better for large scores. But if I'm just going to do like a single part something, I use Noteflight. MuseScore does a lot better if you're doing multi-part. Noteflight does not let you change the key signatures. It wants your clarinet to play the same key as your flute. So, not really good on that one. But MuseScore will let you change the key signature so you can do different instruments. Noteflight with the basic subscription, if you don't pay for it, you have to write each part individually, and then your score, you'll have to, you can't use it. So, I've run into that little error, but overall basic stuff, it works really well. But that's when I transfer over to Finale and use it on my home computer.
Yeah, that's something I didn't mention, but that if you do band or orchestra scores, then a program like Finale is much better at handling things like transpositions and also doing parts extraction. Sibelius is also really good at that too. It doesn't have those limitations that MuseScore or Noteflight do. Yeah.
Have you ever used Flat before? I had a student say that they wanted to use Flat. They found it online, and I haven't used that one. Are you familiar with that?
No, I don't know that one.
Okay.
I've tried a few. There are a few programs that were designed for like tablets and iPads that I tried, and none of them really worked very well. So I still like when I do I'm composing, I still use Finale for everything ultimately, or write by hand.
Finale
Yeah.
is my favorite.
Yeah, it can be tricky because like I think when I have composition students, I'd prefer that they used Finale or Sibelius, but it's kind of like it's a very expensive proposition to tell a family like I think you should buy a $600 computer program, and I think that's the void that MuseScore and Noteflight fill in for a lot of people. Is that it's works pretty well. It's not perfect, but it's also a lot less expensive than the high-powered programs. Yeah. Yeah. Any other questions or comments? All right. Well, thanks so much. It's been really great to talk to you remotely, and I'm glad that you are all here. And I'm hopeful that maybe I'll see some or all of you in person, maybe next June at the state conference, or maybe sometime before then, if things hopefully improve with the pandemic and it can work out. But in any case, it's great to see you now. And if there aren't any other questions, then I'll bid you have a great Saturday. And if you think of any other questions later, you can email me, and I'll send along these documents so that they can be shared with all of you. All right.
Thank you.
Thank
We
you.
appreciate you.
Well, you're welcome. It's been a lot of fun. All right.
Okay.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.